Welcome to Macon Memories, an oral history project at Randolph-Macon College. I'm Lynda Wright, and today is June the 20th, 2008. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Jerome Garris, who was Dean of the College from 1984 to 1998, and we are at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Dr. Garris, can you tell me how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon College?
Well, yes, I can. I knew the president of the college, Liddell Payne, because we were colleagues at Claremont McKenna College. And one afternoon, I was out cutting my lawn, and Liddell walked down the street, saw me out cutting my lawn. We got in a brief conversation, and he indicated that he was looking for an academic dean, and he had wanted to talk to me to ask me whether I'd be interested in applying for it. I said, well, I hadn't thought about it, but he might have caught me at a good time. Because I had been thinking about stepping down as Dean of Students at Claremont McKenna College and simply returning to the faculty. I had done that job for 7 years, and I felt it was time for someone else to do it. I think he spoke with several other people at Claremont McKenna about coming to Randolph-Macon, so I wasn't the only one with whom he had a conversation. But in any case, I did apply, as it turned out, and came out for the interviews and wound up being offered the position. It wasn't a difficult move because, as I say, I was already planning on making a change in what I was currently doing. And moreover, my wife and I had both lived in Virginia on previous occasions near Washington, D.C., because I did a lot of research and ran some programs in Washington during the summer, so we were somewhat familiar with Virginia. And I thought Randolph-Macon looked like an interesting college to join. It was a liberal arts college, and that's where I'd spent all of my career, with the exception of 1 year teaching full-time at UCLA. And so it seemed like a reasonable place to come and to raise our two sons, and indeed it turned out to be so.
What was it like moving from California to Ashland, to a small town in Virginia?
It's pretty easy. I mean, although the Claremont colleges are in a suburb of Los Angeles, it's kind of a small town atmosphere. Claremont in those days probably had about 25,000 people. Ashland is considerably smaller, but it was easy. People were friendly and welcoming, generally, to have us there. Once in a while, people would say, you're from California, but you don't have beads and you don't wear sandals. But otherwise, it was a pretty smooth transition.
Do you remember your first impressions of the college or the town?
Yes, my first impression was when I came out for an interview, and I came from Southern California, where the weather was probably, I guess it was probably in November or something like that. And the weather was probably in the 70s in Southern California. I got to Ashland, it was snowing. Which I thought was a little different. However, my wife and I had lived in Sweden for several years, and so we were familiar with snow, but that was a pretty substantial change. My first week at Randolph-Macon, after I took the job, though, was kind of an unusual one, because I started work on a Monday, and on Wednesday I got a phone call. This is a rather sad story. I got a phone call from the wife of a faculty member who had just retired the end of the previous academic year. And she said, I can't find my husband. He's left, and I'm worried about him. He seems depressed. So we went looking for him. She said, I think he's on campus. And I contacted campus safety, and we tried to find him. And eventually we did find him near the tennis courts. He had taken a pistol with him, and he shot himself. And so another security officer and I found the body. So my first introduction to Randolph-Macon was a rather intense introduction to a situation that I wasn't entirely prepared to deal with. But having been a dean of students, I had also dealt with death among students on occasions. But it was kind of a sort of a damper for my initial contact with the college. And I probably remember that more clearly for the first few weeks than almost anything else that occurred.
Certainly. We had several tragedies on campus this year. It's been a hard year for Randolph-Macon.
I've heard that.
I think then the spirit of a community really comes out in that time. So you might have learned a lot about Randolph-Macon in those first few weeks because
Some
of that.
things. Although, remember, this was in the summer, so most of the faculty and all of the students were gone. So it was a fairly quiet time.
When you think back, do you remember what the 2 or 3 top priorities of the college or the president were when he called you to Randolph-Macon?
Yes, and they were things that we really, I wouldn't say negotiated, but discussed in the sense that we had a formal dialogue. And I came up with, my memory is that I think I had about 12 or 13 priorities that I established for myself as academic dean that I wanted to work on. I'm not sure I can remember every one of them now, but they dealt with several different things. One was to strengthen the faculty, in particular to strengthen faculty productivity in terms of research and scholarship. Secondly, and allied with that, to strengthen the expectations for tenure and promotion above and beyond where they had been historically and even where they were at that point in time. Another one was to work actually on the library, to strengthen the library program, try to find greater resources for the library, and to make it a stronger center point for the academic program. A third one was to create a stronger sense of frankly, a stronger sense of community among the faculty themselves, but also in relation to the administration. Even though I think my predecessor had worked at that, Randolph-Macon had a history in earlier years of considerable, I would say, occasionally turmoil between the administration and the faculty. And there were still deep, I think, reservoirs of concern about administrative actions and decisions when I came to the college. And so one of the things I wanted to work on was to try to, frankly, to bridge that gap and to build better relationships. Another one was to deal with the athletic program and to help the program move from Division 2 in some areas to Division 3, but also, frankly, to change the status of the athletic personnel. Excuse me. From tenure track appointments and to put them on a more regularized contractual basis. And another was to add international programs to the college's curriculum. When I came, there were no study abroad programs. The faculty generally was, well, I wouldn't say the faculty as a whole, but there were some leading members of the faculty who felt that students would not be advantaged by studying abroad, that it was more important for them to study in Ashland, and I didn't share that perspective. And that also led eventually, although it took quite a while to do it, to not only the creation of a number of study abroad programs, but also the addition of some new majors in international relations and international studies, which were kind of a culmination, I think, of that effort. And even the addition of some new language areas, for instance, Chinese, which we were able to add to the curriculum during the time I was at the college. I said I can't remember all the things. There were some others, but I don't just remember offhand.
Well, that's very good that you remembered those.
Oh, I do remember another one. Teaching load. That was another one. I was coming from a college which had a 5-course teaching load. Sorry, Claremont McKenna had a 5-course teaching load at that time. Now has a 4-course teaching load, and which changed while I was academic dean at Claremont. But when I went to Randolph-Macon, we had an 8-course teaching load, which I thought was just way too demanding, even with a 4+1 academic calendar And we managed to reduce it from 8 to 7, but even that, in my opinion, was too many, and it needed to be reduced further in order for faculty members really to do what's expected of them, to be both active as scholars, but also, and perhaps even more consequentially, to be able to teach at a level of preparation and skill that isn't overpowering sometimes, given the number of different courses that faculty members have to teach on a 7-course teaching load.
And how did the faculty respond? I'm sure the course load reduction was probably welcomed, but to the strengthening the faculty expectations for tenure and those things?
Well, I think it's interesting in a way. I mean, there were several faculty members who spoke to me about that issue early on and sort of said, well, we know, that that's a goal that you have. Some would say to me that I think that's a laudable goal, something that's overdue, long overdue at the college. Others were probably less sure that it was a good thing to do. I mean, they were more comfortable with the existing mode of decision-making and were probably not as interested in seeing changes. And it depends on the individual faculty members themselves. It's hard to characterize, or would have been hard to characterize the faculty as a whole, but one of the first decisions that I made in my first year was to essentially disagree with the faculty, a committee on the faculty, which was our APT, Appointment, Promotion, and Tenure Committee, and to recommend against tenure for 2 faculty members, one in sociology and one in mathematics. That was a controversial decision, and I knew that it would be, but I felt it was important. One decision was made because the faculty member made it clear that she had no intention of conducting any scholarly research at all. And my view was this was a clear case because she was a good teacher. In fact, I would say, as someone told me from the math department, if we don't tenure her, we'll never replace her with anyone who's as good in the classroom. And I think that was an accurate perspective. But if you're going to build a stronger faculty across the college as a whole, you've got to have faculty members that are active in their disciplines, or they will fall behind over time. And while their teaching may appear to be effective and interesting to students, ultimately it's not going to be as effective as it can be if they stay active in their professional areas. So the board backed me up on that one, so did the president. A couple of board members said, I disagree with you, but I'll support you, which was encouraging. And I guess that was the important signal that I needed to make as an academic dean, that my expectations, at any rate, for improving the faculty, I could deliver on. And the fact of the matter is that from then on, I think faculty members got the message that I was trying to communicate, and that the demands that we would place on faculty were not going to be overwhelming, that they in fact would be able to meet the expectations without having to work 24-hour days, 7 days a week, at least in most cases.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about if you reduce the course load. In order to do that, I guess you had to hire more faculty.
We did have to hire some. We had to come up with a plan that would permit us to essentially maintain the current curricular program, but also permit that reduction in courses. And there are some ways we did that. You don't have to add people in every department to drop courses. And also meant that there would be a slight increase in class size, but I felt that the numbers were such that we could accommodate that increase. And I think actually it went very smoothly.
Well, the strengthening of faculty requirements for tenure and promotion, it stuck. It seems like that really was a change that you were able to see through the years.
Well, you have to remember that I was dean for 14 years. Yeah. So that's, for most faculty, that's, a long time. If I had only been dean for a couple of years, It's hard to say what would have happened. I mean, if I'd been there for 3 or 4 years, maybe another dean would have come in with a different perspective and things would have changed. But the fact of the matter was that I think that long period of service meant that I was able to essentially convince over time, I think, a large number of faculty members that that was a good way, in fact, to make such decisions. And it also meant that as dean, I was able to work with academic departments to bring in faculty members to the college who were coming with that expectation that the college, in fact, would not only expect it, but would help support faculty in terms of their scholarship and research. And we were very lucky to get a wonderful grant at one point, $1 million gift, to help add additional annual resources to our ability to fund faculty research projects. Because it was important to be able to provide faculty with some resources. It's one thing to say, well, you've got to do more here, but you also have to be able to deliver some support for them.
And I think the faculty now are very appreciative of those grants, the Craigie and others that I've heard a lot of that in these interviews, the research that faculty have been able to do. Do you think that was part of the climate in higher ed at the time as well, of faculty more rigorous scholarship at small liberal arts colleges? Or
I think that's true. I mean, it didn't start in 1984, certainly when I went to Randolph-Macon, but I think the tendency and trend at better liberal arts colleges was, in fact, to try to build a stronger faculty sense of commitment to scholarship. Now, that's not without its controversy even today. As you know, there are some people who write about the faculty, and some people stress in some of their research that emphasis on scholarship has taken away from, at least at liberal arts colleges, the close connections between faculty and students. Now, I don't share that view because I think Randolph-Macon has a balanced perspective on it. Not all institutions do. My current institution probably has even stronger expectations about faculty scholarship. It has a reduced teaching load too, by the way, so there is an expectation faculty will produce more. But it does mean that there is a constant challenge for faculty in Claremont between time devoted to students, outside of the classroom at any rate, and their own scholarly activities. I think that's less the case at Randolph-Macon. And also, Randolph-Macon adapted very quickly to something that I thought was extremely important, and that was to engage undergraduate students in the research that the faculty were carrying out. We started it first and foremost in the science program with the SURF program, which still continues to this day. And by the way, I don't want to suggest that I originated the program. I did not. Came from faculty initiative, but I was a strong supporter of it, I believe. And it then served as a kind of role model for other departments who began to consider how they might involve students in their own scholarly pursuits. And what that's done, I think, is to build a much stronger academic program for students and to some extent for faculty as well across all the disciplines at Randolph-Macon.
You would be pleased to see the SURF projects this summer. There are 35 faculty student pairs, I think, in all disciplines.
Yeah, it's a great number. I mean, and I think Randolph-Macon's a leader in that respect.
Can you talk a little bit about the curriculum changes during your time at Randolph-Macon? You mentioned a couple of majors that were added and some foreign languages. Any other curriculum changes that came to mind, or any themes?
Well, as I said, nowadays we have a term for it, globalization. In those days, we just tried to talk about sort of international efforts to expand the curriculum. That was the major area where I felt we needed to do a lot. I mean, frankly, I thought that there were two major things that needed to happen in the curriculum. One of them was accomplished in my time. The other one was not, by the way. The one that was the international sort of programs we've talked about, and there was a real, for instance, with the creation of the international relations and international studies majors. I originally thought we were going to create a major in international relations, which would have been an interdisciplinary major as I saw it, but one that's typically using that terminology based in political science and economics. But there were people who were interested in international studies from the languages and from the humanities who also wanted to have their own program, if I can describe it that way. In other words, there was a kind of split among large numbers of faculty about the direction that we ought to go in, and we were struggling a little bit, so we just kind of in a Solomonic way just split the difference and said, well, look, why don't we create two majors? Why just one? Why not have two? They can share some common courses, but for students who are interested more in the humanities direction as opposed to the social science direction, they can have an international studies major. And for those who are more interested in social sciences, they can have an international relations major. Sometimes simple decisions like that can lead to very good outcomes and can solve big problems, especially if you wait a little while and let people mull over and talk about their perspectives and make their best arguments and things, rather than trying to push ahead with a kind of one-size-fits-all. I still think that that was a very important advance for us to develop both of those majors. And as a result, I think, to pull a large number of faculty into this area of international education, which had been sorely overlooked by the college previously. My current college hasn't been able to make that choice yet. I hope that someday I'll be able to use the Randolph-Macon model to get some advances there as well. The other area where I didn't succeed in getting much movement was in general education. And I never really tried very hard. I guess I'm a proponent of the possible. And it struck me that there were a number of other areas that I could work on and make progress, but that a modification of the general education program during most of the years that I was at the college would have been a very tough battle. And as an academic dean, you can really only fight so many battles. As a political scientist, I might say, you start the job with a certain amount of political capital. Maybe you gain some over time and lose some over time, depending on the way decisions go. But you can use it all up sometimes in very big battles. In a major curricular reform at Randolph-Macon, I decided, especially in the 80s when I was there, would have been a bruising battle. And I think what happened eventually was that we got the college to the point, just as I was leaving, where serious dialogue could really begin to take place. There had been significant changes in a lot of areas of the college, and at that point, I think, the faculty was ready to really think seriously about the general education program. And, of course, subsequently, they were able to change it. Is it a regret that it didn't happen during my time? Well, yes, in the sense that I would have liked to have seen it happen sooner, but no, in the sense that I'm not sure that it could have happened sooner without really trying to force something that wasn't ready. I think those are really are the major changes. And also, frankly, the other thing that happened over time was that a number of faculty members who I think when I first came to the college were more, let's say, more conservative about curricular matters, over time changed their view. They became more receptive, or one could say more receptive. I suppose you could also say, well, maybe more resigned in some cases to change than they had been before I got there. One of the things that I wanted to do, and this relates both to this and maybe to other areas of college leadership as a dean, was to convince people early on that that while I had some ideas about the direction the college should move in, that I wanted to build a successful coalition of faculty members to join with me in trying to accomplish certain of those ends and goals. And that the end result didn't have to match my particular expectation or desire about what was to be accomplished, but that I could certainly help shape the direction. But I could only do that with the broad support of a lot of individual faculty members. And so one of the things I did when I first took the job over the first couple of years was, on the one hand, while I made some big decisions, I mentioned that non-tenure of 2 faculty members decision against the wishes of the elected faculty committee, I also had to convince faculty members that I was not a dictator and a fairly reasonable person, and that I was a good listener, and that I was interested in reaching decisions collectively. Now, the tenure decision wasn't one reached collectively. That was something I felt I had to do to set a new tone. But once I made it clear that there was going to be a new tone, then I wanted to work with the faculty to decide, well, how will we get there? What will it be like? How can we cooperate to reach those sort of goals that we're looking for? And I think by the end of my time at the college, I really do feel that the faculty and I as dean had reached a method of decision-making that worked in a very strong collaborative fashion. And I always felt that the faculty expressed a lot of goodwill towards the things that I wanted to accomplish. And that's the greatest satisfaction I ever had as dean of the college. And that is the sense that I had a lot of friends on the faculty, that we could talk about things realistically and without ego involvement that would prevent us from trying to achieve the best results we could. And that's one reason why I stayed as long as I did at the college. I had no intention of spending 14 years there as an academic dean. I mean, I thought that I would be at the college 5 to 7 years if everything went okay. And if the faculty didn't like me, then it would probably be a much shorter period of time. The fact of the matter is, I made the decision to leave, not the other way around. And I finally felt that it really was time for me to leave, that I had served the college pretty well, and that I had outlived my time in many respects. And it was time for somebody else to come with new ideas and new perceptions about how to move the college ahead. So that's why I left.
Well, I think you'd be very pleased looking at the curriculum today to see that the groundwork that you laid is there for the new curriculum, but also the student research and the international studies are 2 of the 3 peaks of excellence, which is what they call the cornerstones of our new curriculum. And those are firmly in place and really something that we can build on. The third being internships.
Yes.
I don't know if that was developed at all during your time.
Not as I think not as dramatically as it has been since I left. And I'm glad that that's happened. I think that's an important aspect as well of a liberal arts education, to let students, test their skills and potentially their job interests in the real world. And I'm glad to see that that's happened.
And I think the January term is an ideal format for internships. I think that's why it's been able to thrive at Randolph-Macon, because the students have that time. We're talking about your work with the faculty and the committees, and you were saying how you had to build to get those to work. Can you talk about the faculty governance system and what it was when you got there and how that evolved during your time?
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier that I came into a situation in which there seemed to be some lingering potential. I don't mean actual hostility. That would be an exaggeration. But you had to be very careful about the way in which you made decisions and who you included when you were thinking about making decisions, or you could quickly scratch the surface inadvertently and discover that there was a residuum of real concern about administrators. And so one of the things I did, by the way, that relates to that is I almost never used the personal pronoun. I almost never, as dean, and this is true when I've been dean at the faculty at Claremont too, I almost never used the term I. I always say we. Now that's symbolic for me at one level, and for others maybe, but it's also operational because I really do want to make decisions collectively and collaboratively. And that wore well, I think, with the faculty. I mean, they really wanted to be involved in making decisions at the college. They wanted to be consulted by the dean and the president. They wanted to be in on the takeoff, as the expression goes, rather than just on the landing. And the faculty at Randolph-Macon, in many respects, is well organized to be involved heavily, I think, in faculty governance because, first of all the committees are elective. That's not true at all colleges. And that was important, number one. Number two, the number of faculty members that attended faculty meetings in those days, held at night, by the way, was usually very high, much higher, for instance, than at other institutions that I've been at, also liberal arts colleges. And so faculty take a substantial interest in it. And I found the faculty meetings a fascinating experience from the perspective of the dean. There you are standing. In those days, we met in the old boardroom upstairs in the administration building and surrounded by all these portraits of the former presidents of the college. There was a huge, long table. The faculty sat around the table and then around the outer side of the room. The dean stood by himself at the end of the table. And it puts you on the spot in a way that's kind of hard to visualize and experience if you haven't been there. It's a very different kind of setting in a way, but it was very important for the faculty, that setting, that format, because it meant they were sitting around the table deliberating important issues for the college, as opposed to sitting as the faculty does at my current college and all the other colleges I've ever been at. You know, the faculty sit in a kind of auditorium style or classroom facility, and the dean and the president are sitting at a table up in front or standing up in front. So it's a very different format in a way, and it implied that the faculty and the administration, in a sense, were deliberating around the table. And I always felt that was very, very instructive and kept me mindful of the role of faculty in a way that wasn't an audience out there. So I think faculty governance at Randolph-Macon in the time I was there was healthy. And it was important. And both the president and I were conscious of the role of the faculty, and at least tried to meet our responsibilities to share decision-making with them to the best of our ability to do so.
One other thing on curriculum I want to ask you about. Do you remember the evolution of the Women's Studies program and the background to that situation?
Well, not especially well. I'll tell you why. It's because I never had any question about the fact that we ought to have a women's studies program in a college which had been all male for most of its history. It seemed to me that it was important to make it very clear that this was a coeducational institution. And a women's studies program, in many ways, is a reminder of that fact. And one of the other reasons why I don't remember the details as much, as I say, is because I didn't have to do much, candidly. The faculty members took the lead. I felt it was something that we ought to have, so I was supportive. But it wasn't one of those issues where I had to sort of struggle to try to build a coalition of faculty around the program. Moreover, I remember I gave the opening address. I talked about the women's movement in Sweden and made some comparison with the women's movement in the United States. And so I spent more time thinking about that talk, which was really turned out to be a paper that I did about anything else. So maybe that's not the best way to think about it, but I had a very personal involvement in it.
No, that's good. Another thing that came up as I was researching your time at the college is the, I guess, evolution from an honor code to an academic integrity code.
Right.
And could you expound on that?
Yes. Now, there's where my experience in California was somewhat different. I came from an environment in Claremont where, with one exception, Harvey-Mudd College, there are 5 undergraduate colleges in Claremont, all right adjacent to each other. The colleges didn't have honor codes. At Claremont, where I came from, we had a code of academic integrity. And the reason we didn't have an honor code was because we didn't think kids in the modern era could live up to it. And so our experience wasn't very good. And so I came to Ashland with sort of that notion in mind that I wonder if these honor codes really work. And there were 2 other considerations that bear on that, or maybe one fundamental one, and that is an educational notion. And the second one is a kind of maybe a quasi-ethical religious notion, but they are kind of related, these. And that is that, students are learning as undergraduates. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a residential liberal arts environment, isn't it? To learn how to study, to learn how to think critically, and to learn how to live with other people in a rather close circumstances sometimes, and to get along with each other. And it's quite clear that students grow remarkably during those 4 formative years as undergraduates. The student as a freshman sometimes is very different than the same student as a senior. And they make lots of mistakes in that maturation process. The problem with an honor code is that it's absolute. It doesn't permit mistakes. And so I guess I came to Randolph-Macon supporting the notion, and I know that this was very controversial. There are many people who felt that an honor code was the essence of the Southern tradition of gentlemanly behavior, if you will, of ethical behavior, and to suggest anything else must mean you're some kind of soft relativist in your sort of ethical and moral belief patterns. But I didn't share that view, by the way, and as I've just said. And so I was quite willing to support the notion that something that was a little different than an absolute honor code, where if you break the rules, you're gone, might have greater effectiveness on student behavior. Moreover, we found that students, is the other point, we found that students, were extremely reluctant to come forward when the only penalty was expulsion. We felt, or I felt, I shouldn't put this this time I will use the personal pronoun, I felt that was not likely to result in the kind of active learning process that needed to happen for young men and women at Randolph-Macon, and that's why I supported the change.
How did the faculty and the students respond?
I think the faculty had divided views. Some shared the perspective that I just elucidated. Others did not, shared the former perspective, thought it was a reduction of standards, if you will, to move away from it. Students, I think we did some polling, if I remember correctly, and students generally didn't favor an honor code. They might favor it in principle on occasions, but when you ask them, well, would you report a violation? The response was, no, I wouldn't. And so I think people were divided about it.
Was there any response from the trustees, or many of whom had been alumni under the honor code?
Well, I think they were equally divided. Probably a majority of them probably would have supported an honor code, a continuation of that notion, because it's what they had experienced. But I think a number of them also recognized that, well, I mean, by the way, here's where an administration, and to some extent a faculty, can be very influential with the Board of Trustees. While the Board of Trustees is, in fact, the managing body for the institution, they're not the operators of the institution in an operational sense, I mean. And so they're likely to pay pretty strict attention to a recommendation coming from the administration of a college. up to the board. They usually don't reject administrative notions if they're presented effectively and if it's clear to them that this is a reasoned decision and choice about a change in policy. And I think the board probably approached it that way.
Good. Going back to what you said at the beginning about you had 12 or 13 primary goals, one of which was building a sense of community among the faculty.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the strategies you had for that and the response you got?
Well, I referred to a couple of them. One was the use of the pronoun we, and then trying to make decisions collaboratively, and being a good listener. That's important, as I said earlier. There were some other things. I used to try to get out and around and talk to faculty members, sometimes on their grounds, sometimes in mine. It's hard for a dean to get out of the office sometimes, but I would try to do that. I also, as you probably are aware, played a number of noontime sports with faculty specifically. That was a nice sort of combination, frankly, of my personal interest in getting exercise and reducing tension in the job personally and keeping my weight down. And secondly, getting to know faculty members in situations other than the sort of typical faculty situation. And I was a great supporter, although again, not the originator, a great supporter of what became for a number of years the Friday evening faculty family sort of game nights in the old gym. We kept that going for many years, and there would be 6, 7, 8, 10 families that would participate in that, and we'd play volleyball and basketball and kickball, and kids would run around, and then we'd all go have pizza afterwards. As I mentioned, I did a lot of noon exercising with faculty and was always open to any sport that I could at least come close to participating in. And I thought those games, I also participated, by the way, in intramurals. I thought those games were healthy for faculty. Gave a big party at the end of the academic year every year at our house, where we invited everyone and hoped that everyone would come, and got good turnout. Served very nice food, famous shrimp that people would come miles to eat. And we invited the whole family. It was to be an event with children, spouses, and faculty members themselves. And I think it was a great end to the academic year, and people, I think, enjoyed those parties a lot. At least they always told me that they did. So some social events like that, outside of the normal sort of pattern. Once in a while, I would take faculty teams to conferences and meetings, which was a good way both to come up with some new ideas, but also, again, to build a little support among faculty members for each other. People drawn from different disciplines would go on these trips. That was another, I think, healthy way to try to create a sense of community. And also, whenever I had a chance, and this didn't happen very often, candidly, at Randolph-Macon, but whenever I had a chance, if there was something, let me put this in a slightly different way, but it's the same point. The way to help create community is to be a community member, frankly. A dean, in my opinion, sets a tone for the whole faculty. Okay, and the way in which you make decisions, the way in which you interact with others, you serve as, to some extent, I don't want to overdo this, but to some extent as a mentor. Okay, people watch everything a dean says. I used to think when I was dean at Randolph-Macon that I had to be so careful all the time, because just walking, into one building or another, walking across campus, everyone always wants to come up and ask you something and talk to you. And sometimes you say things that are, sort of offhand. 2 years later, a faculty member will remind you that you said X to me, and boy, you've got to search your memory banks like crazy. Did I really say that? When? Where? Under what circumstances? My point here being that you always have to be conscious that you're on. You're not off. Okay, you're always on. And that on means that you're also demonstrating to people, I think, a way to be a colleague in almost everything you do. So if you're a kind of grumpy, grouchy, distant person, you're probably not going to be seen as someone who's building a sense of, community and collaboration among faculty colleagues. And that's not my style. And I think, I guess I would say that it's worked for me in more than one institution, because it's also true where I am now. I think I can say that I have in a shorter time, obviously, that I've been there, as an academic dean, certainly. I've only been doing it for 3 years, but I think that I have helped to create a better sense of community among that faculty as well. I just think it's so important. I mean, colleges are made up of people. Liberal arts colleges, everything happens on a face-to-face basis. They're not huge organizations with, hundreds and hundreds of people who rarely communicate other than by email and memorandum or telephone. I mean, you talk to people directly. And so personal relationships become very, very important. And the way in which you handle those personal relationships can help characterize not just your relationships with others, but their relationships with others as well.
Thank you. In the fall of 1988, you sponsored a faculty workshop entitled Race Relations on Campus, and it featured Dr. James Farmer, a civil rights leader. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering what prompted this type of workshop for your faculty development that fall, if there was, and what the follow-up was.
Well, we used to do in fact, I didn't originate this. It had started by the previous dean. We used to do a back-to-school workshop for faculty every year, which I always thought was a pretty good idea, actually. It was another way, again, of getting the faculty together to talk about some things that were important or might be seen as important by the faculty. We didn't always ask the faculty what the theme was going to be, by the way, and maybe we should have. I can remember scrambling around the dean's office with Tom Porter and Bill Franz and Mike Wessels at different times when they were in the dean's office trying to figure out what's the theme going to be for next September. So we were always looking for one. Now, the fact of the matter was, we had some racial issues on campus, sort of indirectly. I mean, there were problems with the flying of the Confederate flag on certain occasions. At football games, things of that sort, for instance. There were some problems with the KAs when they had their Old South days with Confederate uniforms on campus. And we understood that from some conversations with African American students on campus that they didn't always feel that they were well received on campus. So it seemed like an appropriate time to try to do something that would help, again, shape greater awareness among the faculty. And one of the things that came out of that, well, what I was going to say, changing the subject slightly, is I probably talked too long. And I've been told that on several occasions at Randolph-Macon. One of the first occasions was I was asked as dean to give a talk to I guess it was the honors convocation, and my first one. And I talked a little bit about myself, etc. And after it was over, Earl Moreland told the president, Liddell Payne, he said, "Well, that Garris guy seems all right, but boy, he sure is long-winded." And so I remembered that because I figured, well, if J. Earl Moreland thinks I'm long-winded, I better be more careful about that. I hope I was, but I do know that I didn't always succeed, because in the cabinet meetings, after about not the first year, but about 3 years in, the vice president for development told the president the same thing. He said, "Geez, that Garris just talks on and on and on. What is wrong with him?" And so I didn't succeed in taking Dr. Moreland's advice to heart, evidently. Probably in a, I always like to think that faculty members are programmed to talk for a certain length of time anyway, which is 50 minutes, but except at Randolph-Macon, where it's 60 minutes. That was one of the things I always thought was fun, by the way, because the faculty, when I got to the college, I've mentioned this obliquely in a couple of occasions, the faculty really have some very firm and fixed ideas about what should happen. For instance, faculty meetings had to be at night. And when I suggested changing them to make it easier, it didn't go over very well. People really didn't want to change it. And that notion of 60-minute hours, most colleges use 50-minute hours, right? Well, the Randolph-Macon faculty, we've done it this way for a long time, and we're not about to change to 50-minute hours. And there were a number of occasions when you could run into things like that, where the faculty were reluctant to change things. And frankly, those weren't critical factors. And so I wasn't going to run up, tilt windmills and those kinds of things. There were others, on the other hand, where you could begin to see the light of day of some change. And those are ones where I put my efforts in.
Well, just to wrap up, I was going to ask you what you think the strengths of Randolph-Macon College are, or were when you were there.
Well, they're the strengths that most liberal arts colleges have. For the whole time, practically, that I was at Randolph-Macon, as we talked about admissions efforts to strengthen the student body, the entering students and things, we tried to grapple with, so what is it that's really, distinctive and unique about Randolph-Macon? And the reality was we couldn't hit upon a single factor that's really special about it. Now, that does not mean that it isn't a special place. What it says is that what's special about Randolph-Macon is a confluence of things, not a single factor. And let me make a contrast with my current institution. What's special about Claremont McKenna College is the fact that in its curriculum it emphasizes economics and government, not to the exclusion of other disciplines, but overwhelmingly so. So in our economics department, we have 27 faculty members in a college that has 1,150 students. It's about the same size as Randolph-Macon, right? That's the size of 5 Randolph-Macon departments. So when anybody asks, well, what's special about that college, we can say, well, it's our mission is to train people in public policy, things of that sort. It's hard to do that with Randolph-Macon, but it's the confluence of things. This, in many respects, this interesting, almost kind of bifurcated notion of the tradition of a college that's, now I've forgotten how old it is, but it's be celebrating its 150th anniversary not so long, right, down the road. It's a very old institution, and it's got a lot of traditions, some of which I referred to a few moments ago, that people don't want to change. And yet at the same time, I'm struck by the fact that it's a college in which many members of the faculty and even administration are willing to consider, within that context of traditional notions and values, new ideas and new ways of doing things. It's a rather unique blend, if you will, and I think that's makes, frankly, for a very healthy environment. Secondly, there's really good spirit, I think, at Randolph-Macon among the students and among the faculty for that, and the staff as well. People feel good about their environment. They relate well to each other. It's an environment in which people are caring about each other, and that's an important aspect of what makes it a successful place, I think. And the fact of the matter is, as I said at one point earlier in this interview, people are really, really important in smaller residential institutions. And Randolph-Macon has always, at least the time I was there, and I think this is still true of it, probably has a very strong academic program, one that's stronger in many respects than the reputation of the institution would presume. I mean, if you look at, U.S. News and World Report rankings, it isn't where it should be because it's really, during my lifetime, it really hasn't had the resources that it needs. No institution has all the resources it would like to have, but there is this question of the necessity for greater financial resources to make the institution continue to improve and to grow and to be strong. And that's a really important, I think, consideration. But the academic program and what the faculty want to deliver to the students and the way they deliver it, I think, is a decided strength. If you take that sum total of all the things we were talking about earlier and the new things that have happened, I mean, the new curriculum, interdisciplinary teaching, the notion of student research is taken very seriously at Randolph-Macon, the fact that faculty members teach a lot and at the same time are involved in scholarly activities, you put all those things together. Even the 60-minute hour means that students are going to spend more time in class than they do at other institutions. All those things together make for a very strong, rich, and deep academic environment. But they're not things that you can sell in a kind of admissions notion in a single phrase or sentence or two. And that's what makes it a hard sell in a way. As I say, I'm not the only one that has grappled with that for a long time to try to figure out, well, how can we boil that down into a kind of catchy phrase? And ultimately, I think the answer is, well, we can't, because it's more than you can capture in a single notion. It is, in fact, a combination of lots of things that makes for a very good institution. And one that people, I think hold dear to their hearts. And even though I've been gone now for almost 10 years from the college, it still means a lot to me. And I try to pay attention to what's happening at the college. I mean, I still get the bulletin, for instance, and I read it. And I still have contacts with faculty members and administrators and even Liddell Payne, because he lives in the same town I do. I mean, there's a certain irony there, right? We both came from the same institution, which, by the way, when I first arrived, was a question of concern among some faculty members, as you might well imagine. Well, we've already got a president from that place. Now we're going to have a dean from there. What's sort of going on here? And I think that over time, as decisions played out, faculty began to see that wasn't necessarily, it didn't necessarily mean that the president and I had exactly the same view on every issue, or that we were going to turn Randolph-Macon into a kind of, a Claremont East, if you will. But it was a concern and a consideration, and now here it is that we both left the college at different points in time, and we wind up being in the same community in Claremont. Again, there's a kind of full circle notion, I guess, to our lives in a way, but we still talk about Randolph-Macon a lot. In fact, we just went to a party for the former president at Claremont McKenna College in Los Angeles, and we drove in together, the Paynes and the Garrises, and we spent most time talking about Randolph-Macon. So it's still important to us.
That's great. Well, you touched on Dr. Moreland, and I just want to ask you, do you have any other Dr. Moreland stories or memories?
Well, the best memory I have isn't quite of Dr. Moreland, but it's about him. I mean, I do remember, well, he was, but he was very careful not to sort of get in my way, in a sense. I think he spent more time bothering the president. I mean that half jokingly, but than he did the dean. And the reality is, I probably undid some of the things that he put together. I mean, tenure in the days when Dr. Moreland was president, he'd kind of walk down the hall and say, I like the cut of your jib. You've been here for a year or two. You're tenured. And bang, that was it. And, of course, what I was trying to do was ensure that we made that a much more procedurally correct and professionally serious decision-making activity. So I don't know whether he ever thought about that or not. We didn't really discuss it. But here's the thing that really means a lot to me about Dr. Moreland. I got invited in about 1990, I think it was 92 or 93, to go to Brazil with a bunch of deans and presidents of Methodist colleges. And we spent 2 weeks there, and we were visiting. The Methodists are very big in Brazil. It's one of the major sort of Protestant denominations in what is nominally a Catholic country, of course. And they have about, they must have about 7 or 8 colleges and allied schools, much like the Randolph-Macon model used to be in Brazil. And I went to one of them. I went to all of them, actually, but one of them was in Porto Alegre. And it's where J. Earl Moreland was president, before he was president at Randolph-Macon. And they remember him in some very impressive ways. When I was there, their gymnasium was Moreland Hall. And you could mention the name Moreland, and most of the students there and almost all the faculty knew exactly who you were talking about, and could even tell stories about his days when he was the leader of that institution. And that was one of the most impressive things I ever ran into, because I realized that this man had not only a legacy at Randolph-Macon of leading the institution for probably longer than anyone else, I think, in history, but in addition had the legacy of leading this institution an entire hemisphere away, at the southern tip, really, of Brazil, practically, in a very different environment and in a very different culture, and was still regarded with considerable esteem. And they have a portrait of him, in fact, in the administration building, a major portrait of him. So that was a connection that I'd never really experienced before, to realize that someone had made such an important impression in 2 different institutions of higher learning. And in that sense, I'm sorry I didn't really get to know him better during the time that I was at Randolph-Macon. He had already passed away by the time I went to Brazil, of course. I would have loved to have talked to him more about his days in Brazil.
He was an amazing man and really kept the college on track in some tough times, I gather.
Yes, yeah. I think he did. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you see as Randolph-Macon's biggest challenges as you look ahead?
Well, candidly, it's a challenge that both President Payne and I grappled with the whole time we were there, and it remains a challenge. It was a challenge, I think, for his successor and for mine as well, and continues to be a challenge, and that is to make the institution one of the premier liberal arts colleges in the country. We strive mightily to improve the faculty, its level of professionalism and its skill and its ability, and also at the same time to improve the quality of the student body and to make it more competitive, and to draw students more broadly from the region and, for that matter, even nationally. And I would say that struggle will continue in the future. I don't think the college was where we felt it should have been when we were there, and it isn't now. And that's not a criticism of the leadership of the college, either self-criticism or otherwise, but it's the reality. Randolph-Macon, I think, has the potential to be a much stronger place than it is. And maybe ultimately financial resources have something to do with it. I mean, the college's financial resources have improved substantially in the last decade. But I'm now at a college, and was before I came to Randolph-Macon, that's very young, in contradistinction to Randolph-Macon, was only founded in 1946. And admittedly, it's part of a consortium that's pretty strong. But what made that college really powerful was two things, I think. One was its specialized mission. Well, Randolph-Macon doesn't have a specialized mission, and it doesn't intend to. But that specialized mission helped the college to attract really strong but focused students. And the second one is finances. I mean, the college, Pomona College, which is one of the other Claremont colleges, as you may know now, really does have, I think, the largest endowment per student of any college in the United States. Pomona has about 1,600 or 1,700 students, and it has an endowment of about $1.4 billion. Now, you can do some things with those kinds of resources that other institutions can't do. And I'm going to make a comment about that in a moment about Randolph-Macon. And the college I'm with now lost $300 million in the financial setbacks. We had the largest loss of any significant strong institution in the nation in the mid-2000s when the market turned down because we were heavily invested in equities. But we're back up now to about $500 million. And we just got a $200 million gift, the largest gift ever to a liberal arts college in the United States by probably about 50%. So, that'll be paid in over a number of years, but probably 10 years from now, the college will have $1 billion endowment. Okay. Now, Randolph-Macon isn't in that class. If you look at all the really powerful schools in the United States, they've all got one significant difference, if not several, from Randolph-Macon, and that is lots of money. So Randolph-Macon's got the programs, it's got the faculty, it's got the history and the setting. It's in a great place, by the way, good location, but it hasn't got the financial resources to really make it a powerful player. And when I look at places like the University of Richmond, for instance, when I came to Virginia, Richmond had really just started becoming then a powerhouse. And it was because of a major gift that they used very wisely. So I always felt that what the college needed more than anything else was a big gift. Now, let me make one other comment that relates to that from a slightly different perspective. When I made the decision to leave what was then a relatively rich college to go to Randolph-Macon, a relatively, let's say, not poor, but unrich college, I did it consciously and openly. And I actually told my spouse, one of the reasons I want to go to Randolph-Macon is I want to see what it's like to be at a college that doesn't have the kind of resources that I had in Claremont, because it must require different kind of decision-making in a way. And the answer is, it does. And the difference is this: it's hard at a place that doesn't have resources, but it forces you to be smarter. Okay? It really does. If you're going to accomplish things with small amounts of money, you've got to be clever to get it done. And when you're at an institution that has a surfeit of resources, on occasions at any rate, you don't have to be as smart or as astute. If you want to do something, you can sort of do it because you can always find, well, that's an exaggeration, but you can frequently find the resources to do it, okay? And so you don't have to be quite as clever. The thing that Randolph-Macon did for me, therefore, was forced me, I think, to be a more astute and more clever about how we were going to accomplish the goals we wanted to accomplish. When we reduced the teaching load, we couldn't hire, 25 new faculty members. And that's not an accurate figure, mind you, but I mean, that just wasn't in the cards. And when we developed the research program for undergraduate students, we had to do it with a minimum of financial resources. Now, what it means, therefore, is you have to ask a lot from your faculty, because you can't pay them with new resources to do new things. And in that kind of an environment, it requires them to be willing to give more of their time, certainly, but more of their creativity to the institution to see it move ahead. And I think that's a real strength for a college like Randolph-Macon. I just hope that someday it won't have to be quite so clever, because it'll have the resources to help build a stronger base environment for the institution. And I'm glad to see, by the way, some of the new building projects that are going on, because I always felt when we built the Brock Center that one of the things and the library for that matter, when we built the new library, incorporating the old one within it, we were building structures that were designed for the future and also were designed to be, and I don't mean this in a casual way, showpieces. I mean, we wanted the library to be something that you would walk into and say, wow, that's pretty neat. I can imagine myself in this library. And the same thing is true of the Brock Center. You can walk in there and a prospective student can say, oh, I can see myself exercising in here. And that's important because in order to attract strong students nowadays, you've got to offer not just the academic program, but the co-curricular program as well. And the more able the college is to build up its physical resources to make itself more attractive to prospective students, the more likely it is to be able to attract stronger students to the college. So I'm glad to see what's going on there.
Yeah, I think you will be pleased to see the results of the master plan that's going on now.
Right.
And as one faculty member who I interviewed in this project said, that he felt the best days of Randolph-Macon were ahead.
Oh, I think that's quite possible,
really,
yeah.
Really positive thing to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, any final comments or reflections?
Well, no, I guess just in retrospect, the time that I spent at Randolph-Macon was really a wonderful period for me. I mean, I had the privilege of working with somebody that I thought was a good president for most of that entire time, Liddell Payne, and briefly with his successor, and working with a lot of wonderful faculty members who I must say were very good-hearted and were really quite easy to work with. And when I look back on it, I'm convinced that they were the best years of my life in many ways. And so I look back on them with fondness, even though one is supposed to look ahead, as you suggested a few moments ago. And it's nice to know occasionally that people still remember my time at the college with nostalgia in some cases, because I look on it very much the same way. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much for participating in our oral history project.
Well, I wanted to say something about the budget-making process because in many respects it's emblematic of some of the things that I was trying to do as dean, and also says a lot about faculty governance at the college. There was a period in the early 90s, I think it was, I don't remember the exact year, it might have been 93, when President Payne went away on a sabbatical. And so I was named acting president. And as acting president, I was in charge of the senior staff. And it was the senior staff that made the budget. I mean, the budget-making process at Randolph-Macon did include the senior staff. And indeed, what would happen is the various departments around the college would submit their budget requests for the coming fiscal year, and then the senior staff would go over them, often sort of line by line, which I'd never experienced at any other college. But boy, it sure gave people a lot of information about the budget requests, which was really helpful because ultimately we could rarely satisfy every request. Well, in fact, I'll make an even stronger statement. You could never satisfy every request. The requests always amounted to more than the new dollars that we were going to have available to us. And the only faculty involvement in that really directly was the one faculty member who was elected by the faculty to sit on the president's cabinet. And then there was a resources and plans committee which didn't really get involved directly in the budget. It made recommendations about departmental budgets onto the cabinet, but I wouldn't argue was a significant factor ultimately in the preparation of the college's budget. So when I took over from
Liddell Payne as acting president, I did a couple of things, one of which he reminded me of on more than one occasion, which was to move his chair out of the president's office and move mine in. And secondly, was to create a new budget-making process. What I did was to invite the Faculty Committee on Resources and Plans, which had about, my memory is right, somewhere around 8 members on it, I think, invited them to join the senior staff. And we used to meet in a classroom, and then sometimes over in the library in a place that was big enough for all of us. And what we would do is do exactly what we had done in the senior staff, but now joined by usually as many as 8 and typically at least 6 members of that committee. And we would go over the budget the same way the senior staff had gone over it, but now we had equal numbers of administrators and faculty. And the notion was that anybody could ask a question about any expenditure. There was no restrictions on the dialogue or discussion, and we went as long as it took to get through the budget, which usually meant a series of meetings over about at least a 2-week period. Many, many hours were invested in this. But at the end, what it meant was we could all reach pretty much a solid consensus on what was going to be funded and what couldn't be funded and where the priorities for the coming fiscal year were going to be placed. Now, I thought that really worked extremely well. We got independent views from faculty members that would not have appeared if it was just the senior staff making these choices. And we also informed a significant number of faculty members about the inner workings of what ultimately is the most important decision-making arena of any college, and that is preparing how much you're going to spend and where it's going to be spent in the coming fiscal year. May not be the most exciting decisions, but they're very instrumental in the college's moving ahead. I thought it worked extremely well. The faculty members seemed to really enjoy it and learned a heck of a lot. And here's the proof of the pudding. When I was the faculty member, was at the faculty meeting, standing at the head of the table, each year I would announce the faculty salary increases. And we'd be done in the faculty meeting, and no sooner would I say, well, the faculty increases for next year are going to average whatever it was going to be, let's say 3.5% or something. And immediately hands would shoot up from faculty members, and they'd say, explain to us why, if you really care about the faculty, we're only getting a 3.5% salary increase, right? And I'd have to try to spend the next 20 or 30 minutes trying to justify why we couldn't do more. And it had a kind of iterative quality about it every year that you could almost sort of predict what was going to happen, who was going to ask the questions, and the unhappiness that might be expressed. So after that first year of this new budget-making process, I introduced the budget again in the faculty meeting, got one of those questions. Might have even been Bruce Unger who asked it. I don't remember for sure. And before I could say a word, Greg Doherty, who was then chair of the classics department, who had been serving on this Resource and Plans Committee, and who was almost quite frequently one of the people who had asked me one of these questions to get started in the faculty meeting on the budget, got up and said, well, let me tell you why we're only giving 3.5%, if that's what it was. Here's why. And he proceeded to make a very impressive argument explaining that we only had X number of new dollars for the coming year. We had to spread it across a number of new things that we wanted to all get done. Everybody could agree on that. And basically, it didn't turn out that, so that's what was left. That wasn't the way the decision was made. But basically what he did was to silence the faculty with information. And it was coming not from a dean or an administrator, but from a faculty member. And what it did was to change the very nature of that dialogue that I suspect had continued for many years, long before I became dean. And it never really happened that way again, because now the faculty had a direct role in making those decisions. When the president came back for the following year, I remember him asking me, well, do we have to go through this process again with the faculty? And I said, Liddell, this is something you do not want to stop doing. This will work in ways that will, and I may have not said warm the cockles of your heart, but will work in ways that will stand us all in good stead. And indeed, we did continue that process after he returned as president. And I felt in many ways that was a really, really important change to make, to involve the faculty in a fundamental arena of decision making and to educate over time. My notion was, over a period of about 7 or 8 years, to educate probably half the faculty in the intricacies of the budget and how difficult it was to meet the demands that people had. And so I rarely heard after that famous notion that deans always hear. And that is, well, if you really cared about my program, you would give me more money. Because now people understood that it's not just that simple.